ఎంతమంది వచ్చారు? 190. Good morning, everybody. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, madam. Good morning, madam.
Okay, shall we go into the next topic? So last class we have completed the small intestine. Any doubts regarding small intestine? Silence means no doubts. Okay, we'll go to the next topic, that is large intestine. So before actually going for the diseases of the large intestine, we are supposed to know something about the basic anatomical points regarding the large intestine and also some activities, that is physiology of the large intestine. So large intestine starts at ileocecal junction and ends at the anus, that is through the anal canal. It opens through anal orifice. So at the ileocecal junction, so the starting point of the large intestine is the cecum. So it is leading into ascending colon, then transverse colon, descending colon, sigmoid colon, rectum, and anal canal. And the length of the large intestine is about 135 centimeters. It begins at ileocecal valve, extend into the up to anus. It is divided into cecum, ascending colon, hepatic flexure, transverse colon, splenic flexure, colon, rectum. Is roughly 35 centimeters long. The wall of the colon is composed of, just like other intestine, mucosa, appendica, and muscular layer. In muscular layer, we have a inner circular layer, but the modification of the longitudinal layer here is where the tinea coli, that is, it is segregated and concentrated into 3 separate longitudinal tinea coli. The longitudinal muscle layer of the large intestine forms tinea coli, 3 tinea coli. And small pocket fat-filled peritoneum, also known as epiploiaceae, they are scattered all over the colon except appendix, cecum, and the rectum. Hosta are the circulations between the tinea. I will show you them. Coming to the first part, cecum is the large blind sac forming the commencement of the large intestine of the body. So it is situated in right iliac fossa on the surface. You can mark it on the right iliac fossa. It communicates superiorly with the ascending colon. Posteriorly, it is related to the appendix. And ileocecal valve is the valve that guards the opening of the ileum into the colon. So it lies on the posteromedial aspect of the cecum. It is guarded by ileocecal valve. Next one is vermiform appendix. It is appendix, you know, it is an organ that is present close to the cecum. It is called vermiform because it looks like a worm. So it is a vermiform appendix. It is a worm-like diverticulum. It arises from posteromedial wall of the cecum, about 2 centimeters below the ileocecal valve. Length varies from 2 to 20 centimeters with an average of 9 to 10 centimeters. Diameter is approximately 0.5 centimeters. It lies in right iliac fossa, and appendicular orifice inside is guarded by what is known as valve of Gerlach. So appendix is known to have known to lie in different positions. All these things you will be probably might have studied in the anatomy itself. So depending upon the its relation to the adjacent organs, it is supposed to be in one of these positions: paracolic, retrocolic, retrocecal, preilial, postileal, pelvic, and median. So paracolic means the appendix here lies on the lateral wall of the just besides the colon. Retrocecal means where it lies behind the cecum. Pre-ileal in front of the ileum, post-ileal behind the ileum. In pelvic position, the appendix lies are directed towards pelvis, whereas mid-inguinal position means it is directed downwards vertically towards the mid-inguinal point. And the details of the appendix you will be studying in the chapter of the appendix. Now I'll go on to the next part other than the cecum, which is leading into ascending colon. The length of it is about 12.5 centimeters, extends from the cecum to the inferior surface of right lobe of the liver. It bends and forms a right colic flexor covered by the peritoneum. Coming to the right colic flexor, it lies at the junction of ascending colon and transverse colon. Here the colon bends forwards, downwards and to the left. The flexor lies on the lower part of the right kidney. Anterosuperiorly, it is related to the colonic impression on the inferior surface of the right lobe of the liver. Next part is the transverse colon. So the length varies about 50 centimeters. It extends across the abdomen from right colic flexor to left colonic flexor, that is splenic flexor. It is suspended by transverse mesocolon attached to the anterior part of the pancreas. The importance of the transverse colon is that it has a wide range of mobility because of the presence of the mesocolon. Anteriorly, it is related to greater omentum and anterior abdominal wall. Posteriorly, it is related to duodenum, particularly D2, that is second part of the duodenum, pancreas and small intestine. Next part is the left colonic flexor, also known as splenic flexor, lies at the junction of transverse colon and descending colon. Here colon bends downwards and then backwards. The flexor is attached to the 11th rib by horizontal fold of peritoneum called phrenicocholic ligament. This is very important. It supports the spleen. One of the supports of the spleen is phrenicocholic ligament. So which is a horizontal peritoneal fold extending from the splenic flexus to 11th rib. This is the diagram showing the different parts of the intestine, the large intestine. You can see that is the appendix. This is the mesocolon. You can see the interior of the cecum along the ileum, that is the ileocecal junction, which is guarded by ileocecal valve. And going up, you can see, so this is the ascending colon, and these are the hostae bulgings from the large intestine. This is the tinea coli. This is right or hepatic flexure, and this is the transverse colon suspended to the by means of transverse mesocolon. You can see another tinea coli here, and that is the left colonic flexure or splenic flexure, and you can see that is followed down to the descending colon. And you can see the yellow projections here, they are nothing but the epipleiac, that is appendix epipleiac. Okay? And this is descending colon, and here comes the sigmoid colon, that is suspended by means of sigmoid mesocolon, and that is followed with the rectum, and this is the anal canal, and that is the external anal sphincter, and that is the anus. So you can see the all parts now. Coming to the descending colon, the length is about 25 centimeters. It extends from the left colic flexor to the sigmoid colon. It is narrower than the ascending colon. Next one is sigmoid colon. The length is, you can see it is very lengthy, 37.5 centimeters around. Extends from the pelvic ring to the third piece of the sacrum, and there it becomes rectum. It forms a sinuous loop and hangs down in the pelvis over the bladder and the uterus. It is suspended by sigmoid mesocolon and covered by coils of the small intestine. Next part is the rectum. It is the distal part of the large gut. The length is about 12 centimeters, diameter is 4 centimeters. It is placed between the sigmoid colon above and the anal canal below. The distension of the rectum causes desire to defecate. This is very important. So distension of the rectum causes desire to defecate. And I have already told you the circulations, appendices epipleiac and tinea, they are absent in the rectum. Coming to the last part, that is the anal canal. It is the terminal part of the large intestine. Length is 3.8 centimeters. Extends from anorectal junction to the anus. Anorectal junction is marked by the forward convexity of the peritoneal flexure of the rectum, lies 2 to 3 centimeters in front of and slightly below the tip of the coccyx, and per-rectal examination when done to rule out the anorectal pathology. So you can do this test, the per-rectal examination, to rule out any anorectal pathology. Last one is the external opening of the large intestine, that is anus. It is the surface opening of the anal canal, situated about 4 centimeters below and in front of the tip of the coccyx, in the cleft between the two buttocks. Surrounding skin is pigmented and thrown into the radiating folds and contains a ring of large apocrine glands that are responsible for the perianal abscess formation. This tabular column gives the differences between the small and large intestine. The first column is the quality, second one is small intestine and large intestine. Coming to the first one, that is appendices epiploicae, they are absent in small intestine, but present in the large intestine. Tinea coli, absent in small intestine, present in large intestine. Circulations. All the three are absent in small intestine, where they are present in the large intestine. Coming to the distensibility is less in case of small intestine, it is more in case of large intestine to receive hard fecal matter. Fixity, greater part is freely mobile in case of small intestine, whereas in large intestine, greater part is fixed. Coming to the villi are present in small intestine to a greater extent, where they are absent in case of larger intestine. Transverse mucosal folds are permanent in case of small intestine, but they get obliterated when longitudinal muscle cord relaxes in case of large intestine. Pairs patches are limited to the small intestine, particularly segregated in the ileum, whereas they are absent in large intestine. And when you talk about the pathological conditions, so the small intestine is a common site for intestinal worms, typhoid and tuberculosis infections, whereas in case of large intestine, entamoeba histolytica, dysentery organisms and carcinoma are the more common lesions. Effects of the infection and irritation in case of small intestine results in diarrhea, whereas that in case of large intestine going to result in dysentery. Coming to the blood supply of the large intestine, mainly derived from superior mesenteric artery and inferior mesenteric artery. The branches of the superior mesenteric artery supply the large intestine from cecum to the middle of the almost proximal portion of the transverse colon, whereas that of the inferior mesenteric artery supplies the rest of the intestine. The branches of the superior mesenteric artery are ileocolic, right colic and middle colic arteries, whereas the branches of the inferior mesenteric artery are left colic, sigmoid, superior rectal arteries, so which supply the descending and sigmoid colon. You can see the blood supply here. So this already I have enumerated while we are talking about the small intestine. So ileocolic, that is superior mesenteric artery comes here, and ileocolic branch comes there, and right colic, middle colic goes like this. Whereas left colic, sigmoid, superior rectal arteries are the branches of the inferior mesenteric artery, and they supply the descending colon, sigmoid, and remaining part of the large intestine. So a word about the arc of Raylan. This is an anastomotic arcade found between the branches of superior mesenteric artery and inferior mesenteric artery. You can see it here. This is the territory of the superior mesenteric artery, and this is the territory of the inferior mesenteric artery. So there is an anastomotic channel from here extending up to this. Okay, that is what is known as arc of Raylan. Very much useful while you are doing intestinal anastomosis. You are supposed to know something about it. And also there is one more important point regarding the space of or avascular space of Raylan. So that lies lateral to the middle colic. This is the middle colic. This area is known as avascular space of the Raylan. That is the space through which we have to go into the supracolic compartment while we are attempting to do gastrojejunostomy. That you will be able to know when you are talking about the gastrojejunostomy surgeries. Coming to the venous drainage, the branches of the superior and mesenteric veins, they drain the blood from the whole of the large intestine. They accompany the corresponding veins and go to the liver through portal system. Coming to the lymphatic drainage, mucosa contains no lymph channels. That is an important point you should know. So mucosal cancers rarely metastasize. Nodes are divided into different groups. Epicolic group of lymph nodes are located in the colon wall itself, whereas paracolic located along the inner margins. Finally, they go to the central lymph nodes along the route of the mesentery. In between, the lymph nodes are there along the branches of the colic arteries, that is called intermediate lymph nodes. Coming to the nerve supply, both colonic activity is mainly under control of the autonomic nervous system, both parasympathetic and sympathetic. So parasympathetic naturally is via vagus and pelvic nerves. The sympathetic fibers go via superior and inferior mesenteric ganglia and then supply along the arteries, they supply the muscle. And there is one more thing regarding the nerve supply. So these reflex gastrocolic reflex. So the effect of meal and colonic activity is named as gastrocolic reflex. That finishes the main points regarding the anatomy. Now we'll go on to the physiology. The principal function of the colon is absorption of the water, sodium and chloride, and fermentation of the dietary fiber occur in the colon by the normal colonic flora that leads to the formation of short chain fatty acids, which are the metabolic fuel to the colonic mucosa. Absorption of other nutrients like glucose, fatty acids, amino acids, vitamins also takes place in the colon. Now we'll go on to the pathological conditions of the large intestine, the most important of which is the tumors. So tumors, of course, just like in other parts of the body, is mainly of two types, benign and malignant. So classical example for the benign tumor of the large intestine is what is known as a polyp. So polyp is nothing but it is a word that is used clinically to describe any protrusion of the mucosa. Whenever there is a protrusion of the mucosa and forms a swelling, that is known as the polyp. So polyps are classically maybe single or sometimes they may be multiple. This is the classification of intestinal polyps in general. So they are broadly classified into four categories: inflammatory, metaplastic, hematomatous, and neoplastic. The classical example for inflammatory polyps are pseudopolyps that are seen in ulcerative colitis, and they are the inflammatory polyps. Metaplastic are either metaplastic or hyperplastic, that is more hyperplasia will be there in these polyps. Third variety is hematomatous that are characteristically exemplified by PJ polyps, that is Peutz-Jeghers polyps and also juvenile polyps. And coming to the neoplastic, they may be benign or malignant. So benign neoplasms producing polyps are adenopolyps. So adenopolyps are of three varieties structurally: tubular, tubulovillous, and villous. Tubular means a stalk with a terminal that is at the top of which you have a tumor, that is tubular. Villous means in the form of villi. So a tuft of villi will be there. So tubulars are classically they are pedunculated, whereas villous are sessile. So in between we have a combination of the both, that is tubulovillous variety. And next neoplastic polyps are adenocarcinoma and carcinoid tumor. This is the classification of intestinal polyps. Coming to the adenomatous polyps. So these adenomatous polyps can vary from tubular adenoma to the villous adenoma. So they can start or present as a tubular adenoma in some cases, or villous adenomas, or in between they can have a tubular villous adenoma. Villous adenomas are more, and size of the adenoma, there is villous adenoma is very, very important. That is one. Second thing is they can cause different effects on the patient, like diarrhea, mucus discharge, loss of the potassium, that is resulting in hypokalemia, and loss of albumin resulting in hypoalbuminemia. So these are the four different effects of villous adenoma in a patient. And risk of malignancy will be high, very, very high in case of villous adenomas, and that increases with the size. If the size of the tumor is more, the risk of the malignancy is also more. So because they have a potential for the development of malignancy, and also they can cause other complications like intussusception and intestinal obstruction. So it is always better to go for the removal of the tumors. So the treatment options that are available are, one is snare polypectomy, where we can go through a endoscope and we can remove the polyp. Next one is endoscopic mucosal resection. Third one is transanal. Through the anus they will go and they can do resection when the polyps are very low. And fourth one is in case of multiple number of the tumors or the polyps where removal is not possible. In such cases, they can try organ beam ablation for these multiple tumors. Coming to a few conditions that have a polyposis basically and have a high propensity for the development of malignancy. So one such condition is familial adenomatous polyposis, FAP. It is defined clinically by the presence of more than 100 colorectal adenomas, but also characterized by duodenal adenomas, multiple extraintestinal manifestations. So basically, these familial adenomatous polyposis is diagnosed when a person have more than 100 colorectal adenomas. That is a basic thing. And sometimes they are also associated with the rest of the tumors like duodenal adenomas, multiple extraintestinal manifestations. So these extraintestinal manifestations usually may be a desmoid tumor or osteoma. And another feature that is associated with 50% of the patients with FAP is congenital hypertrophy of retinal pigment epithelium, which is used as a screening tool to diagnose the condition. So these retinal pigmentary epithelium get hypertrophied in almost 50% of these patients with FAP. So that can be used because retina is very easy to examine through the fundoscope. So that is used to detect or screen the condition for the familial adenomatous polyposis. These are the extracolonic manifestations of FAP, which are divided into three categories depending upon the derivatives that are coming from either endoderm or ectoderm or mesoderm. So the manifestations of the FAP in endodermal derivatives include adenomas and carcinomas of the duodenum, stomach, small intestine, thyroid, and biliary tree. And sometimes there may be funding gland polyps also, or other one is hepatoblastoma. All these tumors can be an endodermal manifestations of the FAP. Coming to the ectodermal derivatives, which show epidermal cyst, pilomatrixoma, congenital hypertrophy of the retinal pigment epithelium, and finally brain tumors. These are the ectodermal derivatives or the conditions that can be associated or manifestations of a FAP. Mesodermal derivatives are the desmoid tumors, osteomas, and dental problems. This is how you can classify and remember the extracolonic manifestations of FAP. Coming to the cardinal features of the FAP, it is autosomal dominant inherited condition and there is a mutation on APC gene. So this autosomal dominant inheritance you will be able to see in 80% of the patients, whereas rest of the 20% will show this mutation on APC gene. More than 100 colonic adenomas are diagnosed. So a person to diagnose as to have FAP, he should be containing at least more than 100 colonic adenomas. And prophylactic surgery is indicated to prevent colorectal malignancy because the incidence of colorectal malignancy is very high following the FAP. So a prophylactic surgery is always indicated in these patients. Polyps and malignant tumors can develop in duodenum and small intestine apart from the large intestine. Coming to the clinical features, so usually polyps are visible in the sigmoidoscopy. So sigmoidoscopy appears to be the main screening tool for these patients apart from the colonoscopy. So usually the polyps are visible by the age of 15 years, that is the lower limit, and visible up to the age of 30 years. So if no adenoma by the age of 30 years, you can say that is not a case of FAP or FAP diagnosis is unlikely in such patients. So 30 years is the upper limit. Usually carcinoma of the large bowel develops 10 to 20 years after the onset of the polyposis. That you should remember. And another thing is malignant change is usually rare before the age of 20 years. These are the 4 points you are supposed to remember when you are talking about the FAP. So almost the sigmoidoscopy is enough to diagnose the condition. So the polyps are visible by the age of 15 years up to 30 years. More than 30 years, it is unlikely that it is a case of FAP. And carcinoma tends to occur 10 to 20 years after the development of the polyps. And if there is no malignant, and it is almost impossible that the malignant change occurs less than 20 years of age. And these are the two important modalities, points you should remember, that the examination of first and second degree relatives is a must, because it is a hereditary condition or with the mutation of the genes that is likely to be positive. Other cases also. So first and second relatives of a diagnosed patient should be examined, and colonoscopy is the modality of choice, as I told you. Coming to management, the aim of surgery is to prevent the development of colorectal malignancies. So the surgical options that are available nowadays are here. Here I have given a list of them. One is colectomy with ileorectal anastomosis. Remove the whole of the colon, leaving alone the rectum, and anastomose the ileum to the rectum. That is colectomy with ileorectal anastomosis. Next one is restorative proctocolectomy with an ileal pouch and anal anastomosis. Here the rectum also removed, and ileum is converted into a pouch to and this ileal pouch is anastomosed to the anus. So that is restorative proctocolectomy with ileal pouch and anastomosis. And total proctocolectomy with ileostomy. So ileum is brought down to the surface as opening. Post-operative surveillance is must in all these patients. The risk of further tumor formation is always there. So surveillance should be there for all these patients. So that finishes the familial adenomatous polyposis. Now we'll go on to the second condition, that is hereditary non-polyposis colorectal cancers, also known as hereditary non-polyposis colorectal cancers. Here polyposis will not be there. Also known as it is transmitted so there is a characterized there is the disease is characterized by increased risk of colorectal cancers, and also okay, are you able to hear me? Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So this hereditary non-polyposis colorectal cancer, also known as HNPCC, also known as Lynch syndrome. It is inherited as autosomal dominant trait, characterized by increased risk of colorectal cancers and also the cancers of endometrium, ovary, stomach and small intestine. It is mainly caused by the mutation in one of the DNA mismatch repair genes, and sometimes okay, the problem here is pathogenesis, mainly caused by mutation in one of the DNA mismatch repair genes. The genes that are related to this are MLH1 and MSH2. These are the two genes that are related to the causation of the HNPCC. Lifetime risk of developing colorectal cancer is 80%, and mean age diagnosis is about 45 years. And most cancers develop in the proximal colon, and females have a 30 to 50% of lifetime risk of developing endometrial cancers. Coming to the diagnosis, so diagnosis of HNPCC can be done either by genetic testing or there has been some criteria laid down by the Amsterdam. So these are the criteria. We can take 2 or more family members with HNPCC related cancer, one of whom is first degree relative of the other two. That means to diagnose that family is having a HNPCC related gene, altered genes. So they should have at least first degree relative of patient already having HNPCC, definitely. Or there must be 2 successive affected generations in a family, or at least 1 colorectal cancer diagnosed before the age of 50 years. So for all these cases, you are supposed to exclude FUP because that is completely different entity where polyposis is there and they have high risk of development of the cancers. Here the polyposis will not be there, but still they have high propensity for the development of the not only colorectal malignancy but also other malignancies like stomach, small intestine, and also ovary and the endometrium in these patients. So FAP must be excluded in all these patients. And remember that you are supposed to confirm your diagnosis by the pathological verification of the tumor. So that is one important point. So all these patients have high risk of development of the colorectal cancer. So they should be kept, once diagnosed, they should be kept under surveillance for all these cases, that is the malignancies. So they should undergo regular colonoscopic study, maybe once in 2 years, and then for the ovary, they have to go for tumor markers, they should be under surveillance. You can do CA-125 for the ovarian tumor. All this should be regularly done in these patients, particularly after 50. So to early detect the pathology or the cancers whenever they come. So you have to diagnose the cases very early and then initiate the treatment. Okay. Next, we will go on to the carcinoma colon. We will continue in the next class. Tomorrow, we will continue in the next class, carcinoma colon.